Hi, my name is Wieteke Holthuijzen, and I'm joining you today remotely to talk a little bit about nature, why I think it's really important to have a connection to nature, and how I, as a scientist, study nature. So I hope you enjoy this little video. All right, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. So, as you heard before, my name is Wieteke Holthuijzen. And it's a bit of an odd name. It's a Dutch name, so my parents are actually from the Netherlands. And so they gave me a very traditional Dutch name. So I'm sure you probably won't come across another Wieteke, but now you know one. So I'm actually from Boise, Idaho. That's where my parents emigrated to once they left the Netherlands. And I spent my whole childhood there. It's a really wonderful place to grow up. Boise's nestled right at the base of the Rocky Mountains. So we had the foothills that are right outside town, and I spent a lot of my childhood growing up in the foothills, running around, looking for birds, turning over rocks, and looking at insects. And that really started my love of nature as a kid because nature was really accessible for me. In particular, I really fell in love with birds. I think that they're just absolutely fascinating creatures, mainly because they can fly, but because there's so many different species of birds. They come in so many different colors, and they can live pretty much anywhere from freezing Antarctic conditions like penguins all the way to deserts. Like there are even certain kinds of seabirds, surprisingly enough, that spend their life at sea and then they actually go and breed in the Atacama Desert down in South America. So birds are just full of surprises. As such, I've worked all over the United States studying birds. I worked in New York and Missouri, Arizona, and I even went to Midway Atoll, which I'm going to talk in a little bit about, to study birds on islands. So now I'm a scientist and I study these seabird islands, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. Now you might be wondering about what's going on in this picture here. So this is me when I was working out on Midway Atoll National Wildlife Refuge. Midway is a teeny tiny island that's about 1,200 miles northwest of Honolulu, Hawaii, and it's located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, about halfway between California and Japan. So there's not a whole lot around it, except for a whole lot of ocean. And even though Midway is really tiny, there are over 3 million birds from nearly 20 different species that breed or nest on Midway Atoll. And one of the most common birds out there is the Laysan albatross. And in this photo, I'm actually holding a chick of a Laysan albatross who had gotten trapped in a burrow because some other species of birds on Midway, they actually don't nest in trees, but some of them dig really deep burrows underground. And sometimes other birds like albatross, which nest on the ground, they can sometimes fall through the soil and fall into these burrows and get stuck, which happened to this little chick. Anyway, I dug out this little chick and it ended up pooping all over me, which smells really terrible. Why did it smell so bad? Well, first of all, it's bird poop. Secondly, albatross specifically eat lots of squid and also flying fish eggs. So their poop can have a very fishy smell. So it's not great when you get it all over you, but it was an absolutely amazing moment and totally made me fall in love with albatross. So that's the one thing about science is that sometimes it's pretty messy, but it's also a really wonderful and rewarding job to have. All right, so this is what Midway looks like. There are albatross as far as the eye can see. It is an absolutely amazing place to work, and it really changed my life when it came to thinking about nature and studying nature and being a scientist. And in particular, I'm what you call a conservation biologist. So I'm interested in how different animals and plants interact with each other, but I'm really interested in protecting specific animals like these albatross from things that threaten their health and safety. And so you might be thinking, well, Midway's in the middle of nowhere, and these albatross are nesting on this island. What could possibly be a problem for these birds? Well, there's a lot of conservation challenges that albatross face, both in terms of their breeding grounds on Midway, but also in the wide open ocean. So a lot of places where albatross tend to fly over the ocean, like albatross fly thousands of miles in search of food, like all over the northern Pacific Ocean. And they're very attracted to things like squid and flying fish eggs. But also, where they tend to find food is where we as people tend to go fishing, in particular, longline fishing. And unfortunately, albatross can get caught up in longline fishing in the hooks that people use, so that's really dangerous for them. But back on the breeding grounds in Midway, one of the problems is invasive species. So invasive species are animals that were brought to a place where they don't normally occur, and then they can cause some real problems or environmental damage. And on Midway, we have house mice. You might think that house mice are really tiny and they're not, something to be really worried about. But house mice have actually started to attack and even kill and eat some of these albatross, which is a really scary thing. So my job now, as a conservation biologist, is to study like what these mice are doing beyond the albatross, how they're affecting the whole Midway ecosystem, and then figuring out how we can remove the mice to ensure that albatross and all the other birds that are in Midway have a safe place to live and breed. So one of the other things that I do in addition to science, which for me includes a lot of field work, meaning that I spend a lot of time outside watching birds, collecting data on birds, but also a lot of time inside in the lab, where I do a lot of laboratory procedures like extracting DNA or running mouse hairs for stable isotope analysis. A lot of my time is actually spent on also doing purely observation about whatever environment that I'm in. And that's really important. And the cool thing about doing this kind of quiet observation of nature is that anyone can do it. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. So one way is like keeping a journal. And whenever I've worked in a different place, whether it's studying seabirds on Midway or planting native plants out on Midway or all the other field work that I did throughout the United States, one of the things I always did is keep a journal. And the journal wasn't really for like all the data that I'm collecting in the field, but it's more about what I'm seeing and thinking as I'm watching birds or hiking throughout a forest. It's about making me really aware of where I am and what I'm doing and my impacts on the environment around me. But in addition to that, I also observe and journal in lots of different ways. Like one of my favorite things is to do photography. And on Midway, I mean, there's albatross that are everywhere. So it's very easy to take a photo of them. But it also allows you to kind of get to know the birds that are out there. And so photography is actually a really important tool for me, and it kind of helps me see life through a different lens. Like when you're on the level of an albatross, you see things very differently. I also do a lot of noodling, so you can see that here as well. I look a lot at the patterns and movement that I see in nature, and I try to capture that in my drawings. And of course, I do a lot of writing. And I have a little snippet here of some writing that I did about when I was out on Midway. And in turn, I've shared that writing, that journaling, if you will, with a lot of different online blogs and organizations in order to share my observations in a place where other people really can't get to all that easily. So I would say it's really important to do journaling because it helps you create a deeper connection wherever you are. And you can journal anytime, anywhere. You don't have to be on Midway. You can be in your backyard, and there's tons to see there. So I highly recommend that you take time to watch and observe the world around you.